Bueno, vamos a continuar con la segunda parte de esta orientación teórica. En esta instancia, como les decía, hemos organizado algunas preguntas junto con Carmela para hacerle a David en relación con estos temas, en relación con sus textos. Se las hemos compartido en inglés, así que yo voy a ir señalando y recapitulando las preguntas y David las va a ir en todo caso respondiendo o comentando. Hacia el final intentaremos alguna suerte de conclusión conjunta, no sé bien si en inglés, en español o en spanglish. Así que, bueno, David, la primera pregunta tenía que ver con lo siguiente. A la luz de las hipótesis estas que venís comentando sobre el autoborramiento del Uruguay en las películas de Control Z, ¿cómo crees que un pequeño cine nacional, a small national cinema, hoy puede competir en el mercado transnacional en esta dialéctica que se da entre autoborramiento y autoetnografía? ¿Cómo se genera o cómo se podría generar un equilibrio entre la idea de autoborramiento y el conocimiento de la autoconstrucción de la nación? Es una pregunta extensa y compleja, pero bueno, lo que puedas decir será bienvenido.
Thank you very much. This is a fascinating question, and I think I know enough from listening to Carmela to think that perhaps she is in a good place to give a different answer to mine. So I'll just say what I think, and then prompt more discussion, I hope, at other times. So I think when we're talking about the aesthetic parameters of what I've been emphasizing in terms of Uruguayan cinema, we should be careful and think about other dimensions at the same time. So there's a much broader question here about construction of national identity on screen and so on. But I want to go a little bit off Latin American cinema and talk about a different cinema, because any nation, whether small or large, has to consider many factors to sort of compete internationally. And I think that is what will impact on the image of the nation, personally. So I'm going to talk about South Korean cinema. So South Korea, I think, is a nation of about 50 million. So it's much bigger than you know, it's the size of the UK instead of the size of Scotland or Uruguay or something like that. But they have some features which we can identify, which indicate why they're so popular internationally. They have Hallyu, the Korean wave that's been going on since the end of the IMF crisis for them in 1997. And it was by deliberate design. And part of the deliberate design of their amazing export profit and potential from their films was they designed the way they would shape their national identity on screen as well. But underneath that, what do they have? They have an industry which has a quota system. And that's sort of a relic now, because all the quota systems in the world are destroyed by, you know, more sort of monopolizing capitalistic forces that try to gain control over distribution. So a quota system, a protectionist system for a nation is unusual nowadays. But because they have one, it enables sort of sustainability to the industry, and that allows sustained investment to come in on a guaranteed return on profit from investment, because they know that the films will be screened for X number of days in the year in the cinema, so money will come back to the industry. So they have an industry with a quota system, and then they have a huge film going culture going back to the 1950s. So again, they know that that profit's going to be there. So they have a sustainable industry. And I think this is very important when we talk about the aesthetic level. The aesthetic level is something you can do, but the basis on which that sits is as, or perhaps more important, the industry and the government, whether there's investment from the government or protection. And in terms of globalization, so a quota system is a bit unusual, but protectionist measure might help. And then the culture of cinema going. I think the aesthetics ultimately are perhaps indicative of this basis for filmmaking and distribution. So when we're talking about autoerasia and we're talking about autoethnography and we're talking about autoconstruction, I think we have to take into account these realities. And I'm just going to read out a little bit from what Epstein was saying when we interviewed him back a long time ago now, but he talks about, this is the piece in Cinema Journal, Uruguay Disappears. He says, this is a quote, "I get annoyed in relation to the funding available for co-productions in the European film festivals, which they term as to produce in the South or in Latin America. For instance, they consider Argentina and Uruguay as equals without taking into account that the Argentinian government funds 70% of the film production. This is a totally different scenario in Uruguay. Uruguayan producers rely on the international film festival circuit before and after making the film." Now, the landscape has changed since then, obviously, and keeps changing. But the point he's trying to make is that you've got to see the infrastructure and the funding that's available as having an impact on the aesthetic. And then he says at the end, or just a bit before that in the article, Uruguayan cinema can be perhaps better defined by a modality of production related to the possibilities of funding and therefore to the size of the film rather than to its thematic content. Now, I'm one of those people who quite likes listening to producers, perhaps a bit more than I like listening to directors necessarily, because this is what I think is telling us the reality of what's underneath. So in terms of finding an idea that's a balance between these notions of auto-identity or auto-erasure, auto-ethnography, auto-construction, to me, it's probably as much to do with the industrial realities.
Muchas gracias. Carmela, ¿querés comentar si sobre alguna de estas preguntas vos querés intervenir y comentar algo en español después de David? Adelante, y si no, no, como prefieras, esto va fuera de guión. Out of the script. Así que, bueno, continuemos entonces con la segunda pregunta, que es, David, si has pensado en las correlaciones entre el nuevo cine uruguayo y el nuevo cine argentino. Señalo esto porque el nuevo cine argentino se caracterizó como un proyecto en el que el borramiento de las señas de lo nacional era un modo de quitarse de encima el pesado lastre del cine nacional testimonial, alegórico y político de la década de los 80 y parte de los 90. Entonces, quería preguntarte si pensaste en este tipo de vinculaciones entre nuevo cine uruguayo y nuevo cine argentino.
This was a great question for me because I learned something new from it. I did not know this about new Argentine cinema, so it was eye-opening for me and very helpful. So I think this is the first lesson there. If you're working on one area and someone from another area that's related can tell you something, that's really helpful. So my answer to this question is I'm not sure, because I haven't interviewed the filmmakers, so I'm not sure about their aesthetic ideals. And maybe there is a correlation. Maybe they think the same and they're trying to break away from the nation and so on. But I'm not sure. If I go back to Epstein's argument, it's more about markets. At some point, Epstein is saying something similar about avoiding the nation, avoiding anything too political, but really his emphasis in the market. So that's me talking to producers. I like listening to producers, but I didn't speak to the artistic people, so I'm not quite sure. But from my knowledge of Argentine cinema and Uruguayan cinema of the 80s and 90s, and it's not extensive, but it's what I know, I get the point, because if you had the official story, La Historia Oficial, The Night of the Pencils, Camila, yes, the political allegories are very there in the 80s and 90s. In Uruguayan cinema, I'm not sure if they had that quite the same heritage to break away from. So if you watch a film like Otario from the 90s, or El Dirigible, there is a degree of political something there, allegory, but it's not quite the same looking back at the political past as you get in something like the official story. So my sense is maybe it isn't quite the same parallel, but I'd have to speak to the filmmakers because they didn't have that same heritage, although maybe they felt that the heritage from the Argentine films was their heritage. That would be interesting to talk about. I do think it's interesting, just two other tiny points on this. One is that I think we need to be careful with the idea of a cinema of the Rio de la Plata, because I think what goes on in Uruguay is very distinct, just because of the different conditions and all the different types of films that are made in Uruguay are Uruguayan and belong to Uruguay, rather than thinking of a cinema of the Rio de la Plata. So that's just my view on that. And in part, it might be a degree of a scholarly issue rather than actually a film industry issue. Because in scholarship, people are very protective of their areas. So when we started writing about Uruguayan cinema, certain people said, aren't you really writing about Rio de la Plata? And what I think we were hearing them saying was, shouldn't you be writing about Argentine cinema like we write about Argentine? You know, I think it is a bit different. So that's one thing. The second thing I suppose to say is, interestingly, with new Argentine cinema, it is extremely political again, with Lucrecia Martel, La Ciénaga, and Pablo Trapero, like the Clan, and these kinds of things. So I think in answer, I think probably there is a difference. I think the Uruguayan filmmaking conditions are different, but interestingly, it's good to hear that and start to think more, because I don't really know the answer. I need to find out more.
Perfecto. Bueno, Carmela, claro, adelante.
Capaz para complementar lo que David dice, me parece que hay un punto de conexión importante que estoy de acuerdo que no está bien hablar como del cine del Río de la Plata, como una generalidad abarcativa de todos los aspectos, pero sí hay un aspecto interesante que es la recepción, y los uruguayos miramos mucho productos argentinos, somos receptores de la producción televisiva principalmente, y a veces, por desgracia, cinematográfica también. Entonces, en esa época, cuando el nuevo cine argentino surge en los 90, Cinemateca proyectaba películas del nuevo cine argentino, y es interesante pensar cómo esos productos que llegaban a través de Cinemateca, que es un circuito de exhibición alternativo al mainstream, al menos, habilitó e impulsó a cineastas uruguayos a ver un tipo de cine diferente, producido en condiciones, si bien distintas, porque son dos países distintos, similares en tanto la infraestructura y los recursos disponibles de los directores como Rechman o Perrone también eran muy escasos. Entonces eso impulsaba a pensar, bueno, se puede hacer un cine diferente, que eso es lo que dicen Story Revela cuando miran esas películas, y lo dicen en entrevistas. Se puede hacer un cine diferente en el Río de la Plata y también en Uruguay, porque ellos también, y acá también recepcionábamos esas películas de los 80 y 90 argentinas, de esas alegóricas con ese peso político, eran también parte de nuestro corpus, ¿no?, cinematográfico en el país. Entonces, si bien es distinto porque es argentino, también eran como la herencia, son parte de nuestra herencia, al menos como receptores de esas películas.
Yeah, so you are sort of pointing to a transnational film culture that might exist irrespective of film industries. That's a really good point, isn't it? Yeah.
Genial. Voy a seguir avanzando, porque nos podríamos quedar hablando de cada punto, pero se haría todo esto muy extenso y no es la idea. Bueno, David, la próxima pregunta es si crees que existe, voy a ser un poco extenso en esta pregunta, alguna relación entre la poca atención académica recibida por el cine uruguayo, ¿sí?, de la cual vos das cuenta en alguno de tus artículos, y el hecho de que Uruguay, después de la recuperación de la democracia, es un país que no se ha caracterizado por acontecimientos políticos extraordinarios. Acá esto puede ser un poco polémica, esta aseveración, pero bueno, lo dejo ahí. Estoy hablando como fuertes crisis económicas, intentos de golpe de Estado, crisis del orden institucional, etcétera, ¿no? O sea, en otras palabras, ¿puede un cine, o sea, es una pregunta, no es otra cosa que eso, ¿puede un cine nacional adquirir valor como tal si no construye ideas propias de puesta en escena y no se ocupa de representar un entorno social, político y económico en crisis? Digo, si no va por el lado estético o si no va por el lado político, digamos, ¿no es cierto? O sea, si es que estos dos campos se pueden obviamente discriminar, que yo creo que no tanto. Pero, digamos, ¿cómo se puede construir un cine nacional? Sería una pregunta más amplia, si no es a través de una construcción de ideas de puesta en escena y estéticas propias, o de una representación muy clara y muy contundente de una realidad social, política, económica extraordinaria o potente a nivel discusión transnacional, ¿no?
Yeah, I think I understand the question, and I certainly can focus on the first part of it. It's quite a complex question, I think. But I think the question about the relationship between little academic attention, whether there's, and the relationship between that and the fact that it's a country, Uruguay is a country not characterized by extraordinary political events, might actually have a really, good answer to that question. Yes, that could be one really strong reason. If I focus on that aspect of the question, what we're actually talking about in some ways, national branding. So national branding is, it's a very important thing that all nations do. Soft power they talk about nowadays in particular, but it depends on how it's deployed and to what end. And for instance, recently, well, let's say recently, a few years ago now, Pepe Mujica was in the news in the UK. He was in the newspapers being lauded as a sort of ethical and principled politician. in an era in which most global politicians were seen to be by the public as quite corrupt. So it's a bit of a rarity globally. And this seemed like a certain kind of branding of Uruguay, a bit like, you know, the same branding of Uruguay. Uruguay natural, you know, Uruguay, the small nation with Pepe Mujica, or Uruguay, the Swiss of the Americas. And why was that? Was it because of the rolling hills and the cows, or was it because of the way money could travel through the country? I guess we don't really know. So I think with all of these ideas about how the nation is understood, and therefore whether scholars will engage with it or not, is it exciting, is it interesting, and so on, I think that could well be a reason. I'm going to try and suggest a slightly different reason, which is to do again with this decolonizing of the academy. And I'm going to talk about, maybe it's the size of the diaspora and who will write about Uruguayan cinema. If in the university sector in Uruguay, people are very good at making films, but perhaps less interested in film studies, shall we say, necessarily. Much stronger tradition on something like literature, perhaps. But if scholars in the diaspora aren't that many, will they be, and are not necessarily that interested in cinema, will they be writing about it? So again, it's this, to me, it's this issue of decolonization. Who will speak up for Uruguay? So I wonder if it's to do with its image, its brand, if you like, or if it's to do with numbers and the fact that bigger nations have more interested scholars around the world.
Es una respuesta interesante, ¿eh? No lo había pensado desde ese punto de vista. Carmela, vos debes tener algo para decir respecto de esta... ¿No? ¿No? Preferí, eso lo querés hablar después. Bueno, entonces avanzamos. Esta es más breve, David. Desde tus primeras publicaciones hasta el presente, en 2007 hasta el presente, ¿cuáles han sido los matices o cambios en tu reflexión sobre el cine uruguayo? Esto algo has dicho en tu presentación inicial, pero quizás quieras hacer algún tipo de comentario suplementario en relación con esto.
Okay, I'm going to share screen again and hopefully get it right this time. Yeah, okay, so I'm just going to go to, if it lets me do it. Changing reflection. So I'll talk through this quite briefly, but in general, what I'm going to say is over the decade or so, there was a move from trying to see Uruguayan cinema with this idea of new Uruguayan cinema, the new wave paradigm, and also the generations. And I'm going to talk about the pros and cons there. Then we moved into autoethnography and small cinemas. Then we moved into autoeurasia and sort of adapting small cinemas. And finally, it's the world of cinemas and the hermeneutic circle. So I think it's that kind of trajectory. But very briefly, without getting bogged down, and the first piece was actually this one from 2009 in Screen that's been reprinted in 33 Cines. So we talked about different filmmaking generations after dictatorship, and it was a neat way to do it. But I think, and it's very familiar to Latin American studies, I think, talking about generations in literature, for example. So that's a big pro. I think people could grasp it in that sense. But on the con side, I wonder actually if talking about a new wave in Uruguay, when we didn't necessarily get that sense from the filmmakers or from all the films that were there, was perhaps a bit of a Eurocentric imposition on that one. Not really sure. Certainly we moved away from it. That's what I would get at. We moved away from it later. It's not so helpful to talk about new Uruguayan cinema because there's always films that aren't in that new sort of neo-noir background. The idea of generations, I don't think we'd hold that one up anymore because I think the industry is too complex and people collaborate in different ways. And also we didn't really speak about Uruguay's relationship.
Sorry, David, some kind of noise is happening right now. I don't know if the microphone you are moving or something like that.
Okay, how's that?
Fine. Perfect.
Okay,
perfect.
Don't move. Sorry. So my point was on this one, we're proud of the article and we really wanted to raise the visibility and we started to manage to do that and the ideas developed. But I think there's a lot in there we rethought afterwards. Do we want to talk about new Uruguayan cinema forever? No. Just the generations thing going to hold up? What's the next generation? So it wasn't actually that helpful. And then why aren't we speaking about co-productions with Argentina or, you know, Uruguay cinema in relation to other things? Moving on, we looked at one film called El Baño del Papa, which was a really interesting film, but we just made a simple argument that it's like an ethnographic work. It shows you Uruguay sort of a primitivist, exoticist way, but also has a bit of a questioning of that. By the time we got to Uruguay Disappears, the thing we've spoken about, we sort of moved then from the new wave into this idea of autoerasure, which come from after autoethnography. And well, we've gone through this one already, but we're in the small cinemas model here, but questioning it. This is an interesting piece, and it's been reprinted as well on the documentaries. And we spoke about two of the documentaries we saw in particular as being rather like museums of memory, in that they can try to construct a history that has disappeared. And you do that with little scraps you've got of that history or personal archives. And this personal is supposed to broaden out onto the political to somehow recuperate something that's lost. And that fed into my later work on a world of cinemas, as I said. And then we got to the special issue. So, which we've spoken about already, I think, the hermeneutic circle and world cinema. So I think the trajectory has gone very much from seeing Uruguayan cinema in a small way into seeing it as part of the world.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Y voy a continuar. No sé si la pregunta sobre el círculo, la construcción de un círculo hermenéutico ya no está respondida en tu presentación anterior. I don't know if the question about the hermeneutic cycle is already answered in your previous presentation. Maybe yes or maybe not. En cualquier caso, la pregunta sería ¿qué implicaciones tiene la construcción de un círculo hermenéutico y de un ambiente transnacional de intercambio y discusión académica? Es decir, ¿cómo se configuran metodológicamente estos espacios de reflexión y cómo incorporas estas categorías en tus estudios sobre cine uruguayo?
Okay, so what I really want to say about the method of creating a hermeneutic circle, and this is being called for a lot in different works on Iranian cinema, Chinese cinema, you know, the study of world cinema. It's what my experience has been of trying over many years, more than a decade, is each time you come up against the challenges which are trying to overcome, but the structural inequality of the system makes it difficult to overcome the challenge. So you want decolonization, but the system doesn't have the flexibility in it to necessarily allow that, or it's just a huge you know, labor of love for everyone involved. So the biggest challenges are different academic traditions, different states of the discipline, and different histories of thought. So you might want to collaborate to work on something, but people are coming with very different histories of knowledge, or, you know, some areas of a certain, you know, intellectual paradigm have been really worked through in some areas, haven't really been touched in others, and vice versa. So that's an intellectual challenge, but perhaps that's the fun one, because you get to talk about the things with the other people. But the other ones are more tricky. Languages, of course, being a really difficult one, and which language should we be publishing in then? Because what we often seem to end up doing is a hermeneutic circle that's then published in English. So the barriers are there. And then the expectations of publishers on what they'll receive, and the peer review, and the challenge there of structural inequality, again, of people saying, you know, I don't think this should be published, it's not what we expect of an article. But then that goes back to the first thing, different academic traditions and different states of the discipline, different histories of thought will mean that you won't see the article in the same way you'd expect to see it from, you know, from someone in your discipline, in your specific well, country, I suppose, really. So what I think we need for hermeneutic circle work in future is, I don't know if it's decolonizing the academy, but certainly it's making a lot more flexibility in what the academy would consider to be an output or a publication. Maybe work on the internet, maybe the digital gives us something which we can talk more easily, rather than the constraints of publications and expectations which can't necessarily be hit because people are working different ways. But also maybe we have to be creative. Maybe it should be, you know, we need to express in different ways. I don't know what that would be, making video essays. I don't know. And I'm not particularly creative, but I think the idea that we can decolonize the academy by all getting together and then publishing more content, but just using the usual pathways we have, my experience has been that that's just not as straightforward as it sounds.
Fantástico. Y bueno, y vamos a finalizar, o por lo menos la última pregunta oficial, y que vamos volviendo un poco a cuestiones más específicas de tu pensamiento en relación con los World of Cinemas o World Cinemas, que no es lo mismo. La pregunta sería, ¿qué potencia heurística tiene hoy, desde tu punto de vista, el concepto de nación para reflexionar sobre una producción cinematográfica que está cada vez más transnacionalizada y globalizada?
Thanks. These have been great questions, by the way, and this one was really fun to try and think about. So I think I've got two parts to the answer. So for the first part, I think in the scholarship in film studies where I am working, we are past the nation. There was a time when everyone was a specialist in a certain nation and courses were on certain nations. I think we are past that. At least everyone knows that's not how films are made and so on. Or not simply that, or they are at certain points in time, but not necessarily. So we've had a journal like Transnational Cinemas, which is now called Transnational Screens, which has been going for 10 years. We've had, the Turn to History from the 1980s, which has been putting text in context. But recently we can maybe start to see this as something of a turn to world cinemas, or even if you don't like that idea, at least we know there's been a turn to world cinemas because there's so much more content on that than there was 10 or 20 years ago. So I think it's evident to film scholars that our global industry is transnational, as is our transculturated global culture. We know this because of, Toby Miller's book on global Hollywood and all the rest of it. I think film criticism maybe doesn't always go in that same place. I think often if you read a highbrow journal like Sight and Sound, you'll still see a sort of gallery of national auteurs. And that does keep the nation there because you're going to have a few selected auteurs per nation. So there's sort of this gallery is created nationally, I think. But I think the scholars don't think it's a sort of national cinema paradigm anymore, but I think it still holds. And I think the reason it holds more broadly, film criticism just being a sort of indicative marker of what holds more broadly, is because, of course, people tend to live in nations, whether they belong to the nation or not. And those borders have a hold. And it's those borders, really. So I think if Etienne Balibar was writing in We the People of Europe about the European exporting of borders and colonialism, of course, they created nations mostly. And of course, imagine communities still remain quite national with national, newspapers and television. So I think the borders hold the nations together. So I think ultimately, this is the reason, I think, that why we see films like we see people initially, that we have that initial simplistic approach and then we find out the complexity. So as we see people, often people say, where are you from? And then once you start to dig into the answer to that, you find it's very complex. So if somebody asks me where I'm from, I might say I'm from the United Kingdom. And if I get the sense that people understand that, I would say I live in Scotland. I might then expect, well, I'll be asked, are you Scottish? I'm not Scottish, I'm English. But I'm from the United Kingdom, but I live in Scotland. It's more complex. Is my offspring Uruguayan, Scottish? But of course, I'm not Scottish, but they are Scottish. And it just goes on and on. I mean, my family has looked at my genealogy, and I am a mixture of English, Scottish, and Welsh. So where am I from? I don't know. But not to go on about me, but I think this is the same with films. I think the paratext tells us where a film is from. This is a film from Uruguay, so we expect to see Uruguay in the film, and then we find out the complexities. Maybe we do or don't think we see Uruguay in the film. Maybe we find out that all the funding has come from all these different places, and what will that then tell us about this kind of identity of the film? Might be a bit more like my identity, like I don't cheer for a national team because I don't feel like I belong to it, for example, much as the filmmakers might think, well, I'm making a film and I live in Uruguay, but am I going to make a film about presents Uruguay or just make my film? So I think these kind of complexities appear. But I think this is the paradox of the negative reaction or the conflicting reactions when we said auto erasure. People might be annoyed because I think, what we need, first of all, is to talk about Uruguayan cinema existing before you start saying it's disappeared. But I think this is the paradox of the national within the globalized now. So that's my answer to that question. Yes, the nation is super important, and I think it's really important in the paratext that we identify where a film is from somehow, but I think once you dig into it, it's just much more complex.
Fantástico, clarísimo. Carmela, no sé si vos querés hacer algún otro comentario, si no vamos a ir de a poco concluyendo el encuentro.
En realidad, no. Creo que las respuestas de David son muy interesantes para seguir pensando. Así que después voy a pedirte, Pablo, el video también para verlo nuevamente, tomar apuntes. Y en realidad, medio que para concluir, quiero, bueno, agradecerle a David y a vos, Pablo, por la invitación. Y bueno, y por esta posibilidad de encontrarnos y de conocerte, eso que decía al principio. Y que quedo como a la expectativa de las nuevas publicaciones o de los nuevos trabajos que sigan haciendo con Soledad sobre cine uruguayo. Eso.
Bueno, por mi parte, agradecerles a vos, Carmela, y a vos, David, por participar en este encuentro. La realidad es que esta es una disciplina, una asignatura nueva dentro de la carrera de artes de la Facultad de Filosofía y Letras de la UBA. Es una disciplina que no es una historia del cine, sino que es un problemas del cine y el audiovisual latinoamericano, que ya supone una serie de cuestiones específicas. Una es que no hablamos de cronologías, no hablamos de diacronías, no ponemos todo en un contexto histórico, sino que pensamos más en términos de problemas en un sentido amplio. Y por otra parte también que seguimos pensando en términos de Latinoamérica como región, como subcontinente, y esto supone a nivel identitario, a nivel cultural, a nivel político, una serie de problemáticas que es difícil agotar, ¿no es cierto?, en un encuentro e incluso en un curso. Pero me parece que esta reflexión tan situada y tan específica de Debbie Martin Jones y María Soledad Montañez en relación al cine uruguayo, nos permite, nos da herramientas para pensar el cine argentino, para pensar el cine latinoamericano en este contexto de transnacionalización cada vez más acelerada del cine, y que creo yo, estoy de acuerdo con David, que el concepto de nación sigue siendo muy importante, solamente que discutiendo de otro modo o relacionándose de otro modo en un mundo en los cuales el cine y las imágenes cada vez circulan, ¿sí?, de modos mucho más acelerados, fluidos e inesperados, y que no se pueden controlar, digamos, ya esos flujos de imágenes, a diferencia de otras épocas donde sí era más controlable o sí se tenía más conciencia completa de dónde estaban las películas. Ahora ya no se sabe dónde están las películas, están en todas partes y en ninguna. Entonces, el concepto de nación es importante como seña de identidad o para pensar ese cine, pero también debe relacionarse en un contexto que es muy diferente al de hace 20 años atrás, ¿no es cierto? Así que, bueno, en fin, I don't know, David, if you have any final thoughts or comments to do. If not, we can finish the session.
Just to say thank you very much indeed. It was a very interesting and productive encounter. I'm delighted to have been here, and thank you very much indeed.
Ok, bueno, muchas gracias y nos vemos pronto. Hasta luego.